Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom. We are back, continuing with our look at the annual Torah portion. We are this week dealing with Vayikra, which is he called. Vayikra, we have finished up with the book of Exodus, Shemot. We looked at the building and the putting together of the tabernacle, and now it's going into how the tabernacle is used. And the first part of the Torah portion, Vayikra, and the first 3 chapters of Vayikra. Vayikra, by the way, is, of course, the beginning of Leviticus. Leviticus 1, all the way up to Leviticus 5 and 19. And so the first 3 chapters, it deals with burnt offerings, whether it be from the cattle or the flock. They give us the various animals and the classifications, the specifications of the animals that were able to be used as burnt offerings. We talked about peace offerings. We talked about meal offerings, talked about peace offerings. But now, over in chapter 4, it begins to go into, well, let's see what it goes into. Let's read, let's look at Leviticus 4. Leviticus 4, and we'll read, let's see here, 1 through 12.
It says, "And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, When a being sins by mistake against any of the commands of Yahweh, which are not to be done, and shall do any of them, if the anointed priest sins, bringing guilt on the people, then he shall bring to Yahweh for his sin which he has sinned a young bull, a perfect one, as a sin offering. And he shall bring the bull to the door of the tent of appointment before Yahweh, and shall lay his hand on the bull's head and slay the bull before Yahweh. And the anointed priest shall take some of the bull's blood and bring it to the tent of appointment. And the priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle some of the blood 7 times before Yahweh, in front of the veil of the set-apart place. And the priest shall put some of the blood on the horns of the slaughter place of sweet incense before Yahweh, which is in the tent of appointment, and pour all the blood of the bull at the base of the slaughter place of the ascending offering, which is at the door of the tent of appointment. Then he takes all the fat of the bull as the sin offering, the fat that covers the entrails and all the fat which is on the entrails, and the 2 kidneys and the fat that is on them by the loins, and the appendage on the liver, which he removes with the kidneys, as it was taken from the bull of the slaughtering of peace offerings. And the priest shall burn them on the slaughter place of the ascending offering. But the skin of the bull and all its flesh, with its head and legs, its entrails and dung, all the bull he shall bring outside the camp to a clean place, where the ashes are poured out, and burn it on wood with fire, Where the ashes are poured out, it is burned.
Okay, very good. So we look at this fourth chapter here, which we'll kind of briefly go over, talk about a little bit. When we look at verse 2, when we look at verse 2, where it says, "Speak to the children of Israel, saying, when a soul sins by mistake against any of the commands of Yahweh, which are not to be done, and shall do any of them." In the English version there, it has a colon. That's a colon, right? What's the two dots? The two dots is a colon, a semicolon. The semicolon has the comma. Okay, so in the English there is helping us to understand that this is kind of like a heading. It's a heading to tell you what's about to be given here is all of the ways that sin offerings are dealt with. We see that in verse 3, it talked about, and what we read all the way down to verse 12, is if a priest sins. If a priest sins, he has to bring a bull, which, by the way, is the most expensive thing that you would bring. The highest of sacrifices that could be brought is the bull, right? And so the priest, he brings the highest if he happens to sin by mistake, right? That's the heading there. If he sins by mistake. And so if we were to drop down to 13, it talks about if the entire congregation of Israel is to sin by mistake, they too bring a bull.
Is it the same thing for a priest as for the whole nation?
Yes, if the priest sins by mistake, he brings a bull. If the whole nation somehow makes a mistake, then they also bring a bull.
So the sin of the priest is essentially the same offense as the sin of the nation.
It's as weighty as it says the consequences are the same. He's not a regular, because 27 says if any being of the people of the land make a mistake, they bring a goat. They bring a female goat. Right? So he's a man, the priest is, but he's not a regular common man of the people of the land. He's a set apart priest. Right? And so even in that, it shows you that there is some distinctions. There's some weights that are, applied to the priest. And so in this chapter, it kind of shows you some of that. Now, what I wanted to pay attention to over here is when we look at, first of all, we go back up. We go back up to verse 8. We go back up to, let's look at verse 8 again. Read for us Leviticus 4 and 8 again. So we can
Then he takes all the fat of the bull as a sin offering, the fat that covers the entrails, and all the fat which is on the entrails.
Okay, so we talked about these parts in the burnt offering because, the same things are kind of offered to the Most High, the fat that's on the entrails. Verse 9 talks about the kidneys and the fat that's on them. So it's the whole kidneys, right? It's the kidneys and the fat that's on them, and the liver. And so we talked about these some when we dealt with the burnt offerings, thinking about the fact that the fat is the overflow, it's the abundance, it's the, it's the reserves, right? It's the part that's over and above what's necessary in a situation, right? Your body gonna use up all of the things that it needs to function, and then you got these other things that are added for for reserves, right? And so when we think about what this represents, the abundance, the overflow, the extra things, and especially in regards to the organs, the innermost parts of the animal that cause the animal to be able to function. Inside of the daily prayers, they talk about the openings. You praise the Almighty for not causing all of the openings to be blocked and for them to be clear, because if just one of your openings were blocked, you wouldn't be able to stand for an hour and pray to the Almighty. And so when you think about the organs, the things that cause you to actually be able to function, when these things go out of whack, it kind of has this trickle down effect and causes your whole bodily situation to be down. So when we think about what this represents, these innermost parts of oneself, and it's interesting the wording here, then he takes all the fat of the bull as the sin offering, as if these parts are kind of the most important aspect of the offering for the sin offering, the innermost parts, where your desires lie, where these things that are most important to you, that without these things you're not able to function and live. It's interesting that when we think about the idea of how this begins in verse 2, when a soul sins, when a nephesh sins, is dealing with your whole being. And then when we get down to verse 8, when it's talking about even these innermost parts of this sacrifice, which represents you, by the way, because we see in verse 4 that the priest shall lay his hand on the bull's head, right, and slay him. So you have this kind of a proxy situation going on where you're causing this bull to now be a representation of you, right? We read in the scriptures where it talks about the fact that the wages of sin is death. Because of sin, the debt that is owed is in fact death. And so the Most High says, well, you don't have to die, but something's got to die on your behalf. And so, again, when we think about this idea of the hand on the head of the bull, you're making this bull be a representation of you. And so the bull's a representation of you, and then now you have this fat and these inners, which is really a representation of your inner self and desires, which cause you to sin in the first place. And so when we look at this over here again, it says you've sinned by You sinned by mistake, right? You sinned by mistake. But what is it that causes one to, even just by mistake, sin? You think about that? What is the thing
By
that
mistake?
by mistake? You're not even doing it on purpose, but you sin by mistake. Like, what is this thing with accidents and mistakes? Anyway, really, what is it? I mean, because we really, yes. No, it wasn't rhetorical. I want to hear what you had to say. I just want to say one more thing. You know, I work in a job that you can't make mistakes. You can't make mistakes. Mistakes will cause people to die. Mistakes will cause bad things to happen that are irreversible if you do make a mistake. And so the way that you don't make mistakes is pay very close attention to what you're doing at all times to ensure that a mistake isn't made. And when you do make mistakes, it's probably because you felt comfortable and you weren't paying close attention.
Or they hired somebody that was ridiculous.
Well, but the ridiculousness of that person is the fact that he's not paying close attention. But go ahead.
Yeah, so that's what it was on me. I want to say if somebody, maybe they got the dates wrong for the piece of bread,
Showed up.
they ate their last cake, you know. But it's carelessness. I feel like that still falls under not paying attention.
Yeah, carelessness, right. And so, it's a mistake. You're not doing it on purpose. However, there's a degree of negligence, I would say, involved. In a mistake. Like sometimes you can be in an accident and it's somebody else's fault, right? It didn't have nothing to do with you. You was in an accident, but it was somebody else's fault. But probably, I just want to say, probably that person, there was a degree of negligence on their part. Yes, on the other person's part in the whole situation, right?
I mean, I think about things I make a mistake in. Like, I made a mistake, I bought the wrong kind of salmon yesterday.
That was a mistake. That was a mistake. That was a
I bought salmon, it
mistake.
had skin on it.
And
I
just
don't know.
and say how that mistake could have been alleviated.
Should have read the label more and just looked at pictures. Like, basically, I looked at it and
You saw it there. That's what I need.
Yeah.
It was a mistake. It was an honest mistake. But there was a degree. There was a degree, however small it was, of negligence involved. Right? And so it's interesting when we look at 11. It's interesting when we look at 11. All the parts that are involved in the sacrifice of the sin offering. Verse 11 talks about the parts that are not involved, right? The skin of the bull, all of its flesh, its head, its legs, its entrails, and its dung. And so when you think about the things that are similar about the skin and the flesh and the head and the legs and the entrails. When you think about the entrails now, that's on the inside. Right? The dung and the entrails are on the inside. So why is that included with these legs that touches the ground, the head that holds the parts that kind of connect with the external realm, the eyes and the ears and the flesh and the skin, all those things that touch the outside that can have influence on, negative influence on an individual these external parts, but then you got the entrails and the dung, which is the inside. But the thing that makes these things similar is the fact that the dung and the entrails was once on the outside. So this is like a connection to the outside realm, right? So it's still in the same kind of category with these external, stimuli, right? The entrails and the dung is just the remnants of that which is connected to the outside. And those things are removed and taken somewhere else and burned. They're burned, they're destroyed, but they're not part of the offering. They're not part of the sin offering. It's interesting when you think about the fact that in Romans, where it talks about the fact that the flesh can't do the things of the law. The laws are spiritual. The flesh can't do the things of the law. Right? And so it's interesting when we look at the sin sacrifice that the external things, even the things that potentially could have actually been involved in the sin, those things are all removed from the actual offering, and the being, the soul, the nephesh, that which represents the actual being, is the thing that's offered back to the Most High. I thought that was interesting. Okay, so does anybody else have any thoughts, questions, or comments about any of that? Okay, so more can be said about these verses, and we have all of these things in cataloged on the website. Put the links in the description so that they can be viewed.